know if the definition of success changed or just what I was looking for from life. And it became more about purpose, it became more about fulfillment, it became more about making a difference. So there is experimentation, there's observation, there's reflection. So you do something, you try out things, you observe, then you reflect on it, you understand what the concept is, and then you kind of apply it in multiple contexts and you connect it to real life. And you're assessed during that cycle rather than only through exams at the end of the day. I think maybe entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs with a big mission or something. For me, I must say I'm an accidental entrepreneur. Try lots of small experiments. Because you can't sort of think your way to, a new way of being. You have to act your way into it. So maybe a decade ago, nutritionists and trainers were a niche thing. A few people would have them. Today, so many people will have a nutritionist and a trainer. And I think that maybe in another decade, people will have a therapist and a coach. Yeah, so just being able to sit back, reflect, notice yourself is huge. Find a sense of stillness to be able to really connect deeply with myself or the person who's in front of me. And then for me now is, how do I keep bringing that into my work? The biggest difference that struck me was that over there you were not competing against each other. You were just competing against yourself to get better. I think organizations, to be successful, really need to tap their collective wisdom. Instead of thinking that one person at the top or a few people at the top know the right answers and then everybody else just has to follow that. Fathers, in my practice, also care about spending time with their children, but they don't carry as much guilt as mothers do.
Welcome to the Untitled Show. Today we welcome Shweta Anand Arora, who's the founder and CEO of Core Question. Shweta has also been in the leadership position of social impact at BCG. She has also been in the leadership team of various education sector organizations. She's been consistently a top performer at whatever she's done. She is an alum of Harvard University and also of IIM Ahmedabad. So welcome to the show, Shweta.
Thanks so much, Bhavna, for having me.
So let me dive right in and ask, what does success mean to you?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question. Also, because I think my definition of success has changed many times in my life. And I would say, when I started out, when I first got into IIM Ahmedabad, I guess that itself was success. That, you're going to such a big brand and everybody knows it, everybody considers it quite a big thing. And then pretty soon, actually, once I entered the corporate world, and I felt like, okay, I did a couple of years at BCG, and then I felt like, okay, this is not what I'm looking for in life. And I don't know if the definition of success changed or just what I was looking for from life. And it became more about purpose, it became more about fulfillment, it became more about making a difference. And that's what led me to the education sector. Spent several years there. And I think today, if I think about it, there are some things I care about. And to me, success is just increasing those things in the world. So I care about workplaces being thriving places where people can be their best. I care about love being present in workplaces. And so for me, success is if I can make even a small dent in that happening. Yeah, that's success to me. So I think, it's evolved over my lifespan.
So a lot of people, when they are in their corporate jobs, after a certain point in life, I think often say around 33, 35, that time they start questioning, what is it that I'm doing? Is it like a guinea pig who's just constantly moving and trying to keep pace with whatever is happening? You're doing what your bosses expect you to do, and then there's this corporate rut that you are a part of, and at that time you suddenly start questioning, like maybe you also did while you were at BCG, when you started questioning, what is it that you question, and what made you feel like you needed to sort of break free?
Yeah. You know what you're saying actually, now that I've started doing this work and I have learned so much about how um, human beings grow and evolve over time, I have actually now understood this through the lens of theory and research. And the fact is that um, I mean, there are so many people who've talked about how what we look for from life changes, and where we get our sense of power, our sense of accomplishment, how we make sense of the world changes. And there are all like so many different theories, different models, but they really converge on the fact that somewhere we make this transition from our sense of accomplishment coming from the outside and coming from our titles, coming from our designation, the money we earn, the things we own, to this sense of purpose and what are we creating in this world, or what are our values, what do we care about, and how do we bring that alive in the world. And I think that's what happened for me as well. Before I went to IIM Ahmedabad, I went on this summer camp in the a break between college and my MBA. And this summer camp was basically an outdoor adventure program for children, 9 to 11-year-olds. And it was like, it had such a huge impact on my career later on, because firstly, I had a blast. But I was so struck by the fact that in that 1 week, children learned so much about what matters in life. Things like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, having courage even when you're scared to try something, being able to reflect when you're not able to do something and accept failure, helping each other overcome their hesitations. There were so many things that they learned in that 1 week, and there was so much reflection and confidence building. And I was like, oh my God, in whatever 13, 14 years of school life, we don't learn any of this. We go through school just sort of, through the motions, like learning the facts and all of that, giving exams. And then we come out at the other end, and then we have to like be thrown in at the deep end when we go to work and learn all of this. And I started thinking that, education should be different. It should include some of this. And that's what actually led me to education. And so even while I was at IIM Ahmedabad, I was thinking about all of this. I was thinking about how I would like to do something in the space of education, bring some of this into the mainstream, sort of, like into the everyday of schools, not have to go on this one special summer camp where you learn this. And then things happened such that, the organization that was doing the summer camp started working with schools, started bringing some of this philosophy there. And I said, okay, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So that's what led me away from BCG and to the education space. And then, one thing followed another. But yeah, that's an example of how sort of I started asking those questions. And I think life sort of also gave me the opportunity to pursue what I really wanted to at that moment.
And sometimes it happens that when you are constantly thinking about something, you sort of chance upon exactly what you were looking for. So that, I mean, it just works in magical ways.
Yeah.
So you spoke about the education sector. What are some of the, if we can talk about some specific activities or some specific things that you think should be done or can be done at schools, apart from just the regular science, maths, English, social curriculum? What would those be?
Yeah, I think of course education has also come such a long way from the time when I first entered. But really, for me, it was one that even the science, maths, all of that should make more sense. Like it should be tied to real life. It should have some meaning. Like, you should be able to use those skills, and you should be able to see why I'm learning some of that. And that's the kind of work that I was doing for a long time.
Which involved experimentation.
So that involved, so I was working with this organization called Exceed, and it was basically about rethinking how classroom transaction happens. And it was in a way that, so there is experimentation, there's observation, there's reflection. So you do something, you try out things, you observe then you reflect on it, you understand what the concept is, and then you kind of apply it in multiple contexts and you connect it to real life. And you're assessed during that cycle rather than only through exams at the end of the day. um, and then of course I think today it's also so important to, and I think some of the leading schools are doing that, to focus on social and emotional learning, to focus on the skills which will actually help you navigate life. And so, like I was saying, in the summer camp, some of these were really just being able to think about the experiences you're having and think about your own relationship to those experiences, right? Like if I have to climb a rock and I'm standing at the edge and I'm feeling so scared, what's my like internal chatter, and how can I use that chatter to actually help myself do that seemingly insurmountable thing, rather than actually hold myself back and like give in to the fear. And that was in the summer camp, but today I think schools are bringing that into the classroom as well.
That is something that was being taught to the children, how they could sort of fight their mental chatter.
Yeah, I mean, of course, 9 to 11-year-olds were like, what I was doing was with little kids, but it was about reflecting on, what was going on for me. How can I look at it with a lens of hope rather than fear? How can I tap my courage? So every day they would have those experiences, and in the evening for an hour we would just sit and reflect and talk about those experiences and help make sense of what helps us and what comes in the way. So yeah, and actually if I think about it, that's what we do today, like as a leadership coach with adults. That is exactly the work that we do, like help them deconstruct their mental chatter, what comes in the way of them being their best, and what can support them in actually living out their potential.
You studied at Harvard and you studied at IMA, and at that time a lot of information was not available everywhere. It wasn't as easily accessible as it is maybe today. So again, this is a question that I'm asking everyone. How important do you think is pedigree, and how relevant do you think it will continue to be a few years from now, when in an age which is called an information age, where everything has become like an open university, and where you have people coming from even tier 3 cities making a huge impact. So yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think honestly, I have obviously been privileged that I've had the labels on my side in some sense. And I think that it's opened doors or opened conversations for me at times where maybe if I didn't have it, I don't know if those doors would have opened. I mean, very small example. When I was in the US studying at Harvard, one of the things I really wanted to do was go into classrooms and observe teachers in action. And just writing an email to them saying I'm a student at Harvard, they said, yeah, sure, come. And, I mean, I don't know if I had not been at Harvard, if they would have been as welcoming. Maybe they would have, maybe they wouldn't. I don't know. I think in terms of careers today, I think the labels are used more as a, knowing that, okay, you went through a rigorous selection process to get there. And so a lot of people use that as a shortcut for
like
selection.
A foot in the door, you at least
in some sense. Yeah. And, people kind of assume that, okay, you have the smarts or you have certain analytical skills or whatever it may be, whatever that particular label stands for. And they may be willing to give you a chance. So I think the fact is, yes, information is getting democratized, and that's an amazing thing. And I think in terms of actually building skills and having what you need to be successful at a job, it's probably available outside of these universities. And the drive and the hunger that comes in people who are from smaller cities is of a different level. There is, I think, in bigger cities now a greater sense of like privilege,
Privilege,
entitlement,
yeah.
that's sort of become part of. We struggle also to find talent, where you get that good mix of skills and like strong preparation, but also a sense of wanting to do more and ambition and all of that. That said, I don't know, in a place like India where there are always so many people for every job, like so many aspirants, I don't know if this, the fact that it's used as a shortcut, I don't know if that's going to go away in a hurry. I would be very happy if it does, but I have no clue if that's around the
Yeah.
corner or not.
When you started the core question, what was the motivation behind it?
Yeah. So, I think maybe entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs with a big mission or something. For me, I must say I'm an accidental entrepreneur. And the way it happened for me was that I had taken a break from my corporate career and I knew I wanted to do something different, but I didn't know what it was. And one of the books I read about career transitions had a piece of advice that I took seriously, which, and I'm sharing this because I think it's useful because so many people now I find are in transition at this kind of life stage. And it said that try lots of small experiments because you can't sort of think your way to, a new way of being. You have to act your way into it. And so I started doing lots of experiments, tried lots of things. And one of the experiments I tried was that I did this coaching course. And I loved it so much that I kind of knew that that would be my next chapter in some sense. And honestly, I didn't have, I didn't know when I started that what was it all going to be about. And honestly, I've just put one foot in front of the other. It started out with coaching individuals, and it gave me a huge sense of fulfillment. And then many of the leaders I coached said, okay, can you come and help me with my team? I can see a transformation in myself. I would like to see a shift in my team as well. And then we went from there to working with larger systems, being, like working with values, working with purpose. It led us to now a partnership with a global firm. So honestly, I could not have predicted any of this when I started. I could not have said, oh, this is what it's all going to be about. But yeah, I think the thing that called me to it was, again, that sense of purpose that, I could see even in a single coaching session, I could see that it lit a spark in somebody's, like, the very first session I did as a practice during my course. I was like, the whole day I had this warm glow inside because I could feel like, okay, yeah, this lit a spark in somebody's mind. It made something possible that wasn't possible for her before we had that conversation. And so this whole thing about just unlocking people, unlocking team systems, I think that's been the most meaningful thing about it for me. And that's, yeah. And I think today, I really think that, like, I dream of workplaces which look very different from what maybe many of our workplaces today look like. And that's the dream that sort of, keeps me inspired to do my work.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, in your leadership coaching journey, what kind of leaders or individuals have you met, and what are their challenges that they come to you with?
Yeah, so it's been a huge variety of people. So it could be founders of startups, it could be corporate, like senior corporate professionals who are leading, large systems. It could be, I've worked with a lot of women. So it could be women who are sort of either in leadership positions or on the cusp of like senior leadership, and their organizations are investing in them. I've worked with individuals who are looking to make career transitions. So like I was saying, so many people now seem to be sort of asking themselves existential questions about what do they really want from their career. So I've worked with a lot of people like that. Yeah, so it's been across the board, across geographies, cultures, and the kinds of things they come with really is, how do I take the next step? So whether it is a transition where they're trying to figure out, okay, what next, or whether it is, in their own journey of leadership where they're looking at taking on a bigger role, or having just received a bigger role, being able to do justice to it. How do I take the next step to get better, to be able to be, fit for whatever I need to do next? That's sort of the common theme. And then the specific challenges, of course, vary. Like, it's totally an individual journey. Like in one-on-one coaching, it's so different for each individual.
And leadership coaching as a profession, I think, is very new. Did not exist, say, 3 decades back or 4 decades back.
Yeah.
Even if it existed, it was not sort of called leadership coaching. It would be your mentors or guides or somebody who you've met in your profession, and maybe you ask for some advice. It was very fragmented. They say that the winner stands alone, and if a leader is in a position where he has to guide people under him, and he or she himself has a question in mind, or has certain doubts in mind, there was no place to go to or clarify. What is it that is sort of now instigating people to at least consider leadership coaching? Because often people become complacent. They, if for example, if they are in an organization, have received a leadership position, they may be complacent, they may feel very confident, but there could be still certain underlying issues that have to be addressed before they can actually lead people. So how is it that what's sort of changing, I'm asking?
Yeah. I think the way we think about taking support is definitely changing. And one of the things that I often think is that, like, maybe a decade ago, nutritionists and trainers were a niche thing. A few people would have them. Today, so many people will have a nutritionist and a trainer. And I think that maybe in another decade, people will have a therapist and a coach. Today it's physical fitness, tomorrow mental fitness will become equally important. I mean, it is becoming.
It has become, yeah.
And I think that's the thing. As people also have more disposable income, and they can think about what are the ways in which I can actually support myself to grow, just like they're investing in their physical fitness. I think earlier maybe there was this thing that, oh, you have to do it alone. Like, and people didn't know that there was a way that you can actually find support. In fact, one of my clients recently was telling me that today, if I have to invest in a company and the CEO doesn't have a coach, I'll actually ask myself, oh, is there something wrong here?
Wow.
So I was actually surprised to hear that, because, even I was taken aback. But obviously that thing that it's good to get support when you can. It'll help you actually be a better version of yourself. I think that's becoming far more commonplace than it was before. And also organizations are sort of, especially larger organizations, global organizations, are investing in their talent. They are able to see how, when somebody is on the cusp of a big transition, something which will demand a very different kind of like a different level of leadership from you, then they're investing in their talent as well. So that has also helped sort of, sometimes an individual may not be aware or may not be the one who's seeking it, but the organization brings it their way. And as long as they have an open mind, it works equally well, and the sort of word spreads and all of that. Yeah.
So is there like a case study or something that you something that's on top of your mind that you could talk about, where there was a leader who came up, who had certain challenges, and then after they went through the whole coaching experience, there was a transformation that took place? So anything that you could remember, any experience, could be weird, could be funny, could be just a sweet experience.
Yeah, well, I don't know about weird and funny, but I remember working with this CEO who came to me at a point where so he'd been CEO of this company for about 3 years, and they had come out of a really bad business year. And so he was feeling a little bit shaken. His confidence was a bit shaken. And I think when he came in, the main thing that he wanted to work on was, he said, I want to work on just being calm, being able to be calm in the time, like in the face of pressure. And, and to give that energy to my team. And today what's happening is that I'm actually losing it with my team, and as a result they kind of hide bad news from me, and bad news comes so late, and then it's even worse, and then I'm losing it again. And that was sort of where things were at. And that was a beautiful journey, because as we worked together, some of the things we unpacked were that some of the things that were so meaningful to him, things which were his very dear values, were actually maybe even coming in the way of him being his best. So like one of the things that he really cared about was that his team be able to do their best. And what that meant was that when they messed up, he was not calm. He was he was so
He had a sense of belonging with the team, that he felt that
not just sense of belonging, but he was so invested in their success that he like personally felt that, "Arey yaar, how can you mess up like this? How can you not live your potential?" And so and when he realized that, when he saw that, he was like, "Oh, okay, this is what I'm doing." And so what he started doing was he created systems and processes where he was looking at data with the team, and there were things that would flag any issues early. And that freed up a lot of his capacity to actually work with them on creating, on building. Those were some of his huge strengths which he had not been using. And he had said that I am so invested in their performance, but right now I'm demanding performance, I'm not enabling performance. So that shift happened where he really started working with them. And he also realized that he again had a very strong sense of purpose, but he realized, oh my god, as a result of that, I'm taking myself so seriously, like I'm carrying this heavy load that oh, I'm here to make such a big difference. And then again, when he saw that, he was able to just be lighter, like with his board, with his team, with all his stakeholders. And that lighter energy just enabled him to show up differently. And then at the end of that, that next year, they had a phenomenal year. And he said that primarily it was because, I learned in a short time what it would have taken me many crises to have learned otherwise. So, so just being able to sit back, reflect, notice yourself is huge. Yeah.
And as you said in the beginning, often we start associating ourselves with the titles that we hold, the positions that we hold. In fact, that is how the name of this show came up, the Untitled Show, where we will bring in leaders, but we would not want them to still be, think of themselves as, say, a CEO or a founder. You just be yourself, and of course that is a part of your life that will come in the conversation. But I'm just thinking that while we all associate, our identity is defined by the work that we do often, how do we dissociate from that, and how do we become whole, instead of just seeing a part of ourselves and thinking, okay, this is me?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful question. I was referring back to some of the theories about how adults develop, and some of them talk about this. And so these are also some natural transitions that happen in terms of, so like one of the ones that I find very simple to understand, it's called the 6 stages of power. And it talks about how we go from powerlessness in the beginning, like as children, we don't have much power, I guess. Then we go to power by association, where, it's the brand, it's the people I know, that's where I get my power. Then it goes to power by achievement, which is, my titles, what I've accomplished. And then after that, there is this phase where, you were referring to it as well, where you start asking, okay, what is really important to me? It's called power by reflection, where you really wonder, okay, what is life all about? What do I want my life to be about? And, I really start thinking about my own journey and what's important. And then I go and it actually talks about this wall, and you kind of almost have to break through that wall, and then you get to power by purpose, which is where that's what drives you. And then the last one is power by wisdom, which I think very few
Wow.
people get to. But I
Beautiful.
always think of people like the Dalai Lama or people
Yeah.
whose very presence itself is, you know, just so meaningful and so deep. And so, what can we do? I think one, I find just knowing this map is helpful
Yeah.
because it kind of shows you, okay, yeah, there, you
Where
know,
am I right now?
where am
Here?
I right now, and there is something ahead. And I think the other thing that helps is just being able to, you know, reflect and like get on the balcony of our own experience. So, you know, if you think about like, oh, there's something that I'm continuously finding very triggering. Can I notice that? Can I take a step back? Can I reflect? And then can I start unpacking it a little bit? And then when I do that time and again, you know, I get distance from those things and I create choice for myself. And as I keep doing that, I grow. And then as I grow, I go through, you know, some of, like I have the opportunity to go to some of these um, stages which have a different way of looking at the world.
So, how much does, say, spiritual tools play a role in being able to find your purpose or see yourself as a person who could, there are when you start realizing that you could unlock a few more dimensions to life, do you think that spiritual tools or spirituality has a role to play in it?
Yeah, I think it, you know, honestly, when I came to coaching, I wasn't a believer in spirituality. I used to actually be a little wary of it. And the coaching course, which I mentioned that I did and I loved it so much, was actually positioned as something which is deeply spiritual. And I remember asking the person this question that, oh, you know, I don't know if this one is for me. I might feel uncomfortable. And she said, no, you just trust me and you come. And so for me, actually, my journey into coaching became my journey into spirituality as well. And they've actually been very intertwined.
Oh.
And I think that, yes, they are so intertwined in terms of, you know, our growth. Like, I think what Eastern wisdom has held and what Western sort of research is now showing up, there are so many intersections. And I think that, you know, again, one of the coaching courses I did was another one was, it's called like transformational coaching. And its focus actually was on human transformation. And again, very deeply spiritual, based on practices which are very connected to, you know, I would say practices that come out of spirituality. So things like just slowing down, being able to be in the present, being able to really focus on your values rather than coming always from an agenda, being able to create healing, being able to face into your pain,
Yeah.
being able to trust the universe. Like some of these things which, you know, to me are very intertwined with
Yeah,
what we learn
yeah.
from spiritual practice. And, you know, I see today that some of the most leading coaches in the world and people who are really focused on deep, deep human transformation are also drawing a lot from spirituality and the wisdom that comes from there. So, I mean, I think that, you know, these are all things which are pushing us to sort of evolve our
Yeah.
consciousness as human beings, and they're deeply, deeply intertwined.
During our own life course, do you think there are certain ideal time frames or ideal age range where a certain power stage should get unlocked? Because otherwise, could it be very conflicting? So, why I'm asking this question is because of my own personal experience, I'll tell you. Whenever I feel, say, very connected to divinity, whenever I'm into spiritual practices, I don't feel like doing anything else. I feel everything else is useless. I mean, I don't feel that attached to creating material wealth. It's not like I will not do my duties. Any duty that I have will be done. but otherwise everything else becomes very pointless, and you just want to go deeper into, your spiritual quest maybe. um on the other hand, I mean, but you are at a stage where you can't really afford to maybe, leave everything, or you've already started, say, an enterprise, or you're already a CEO of an enterprise. You have to think about the people associated with you, you have to think about your family, or there could be places where a person is the sole breadwinner and they have certain responsibilities. So I mean, could it be very conflicting while this is all intertwined at the same time conflicting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a, what you've touched on is something which is a deep thread in my life also right now. And it's something which I always sort of am grappling with that, also have this deep pull to just explore like meditation, spirituality. And I think the answer which I am landing on, and of course, this is a journey, and I don't know if this is the answer that will stay, is, I've explored actually, I realized that one of the things which we tend to do is look at a lot of things as either or, that either I can do this or I can do this. Or either I can find slowness or I can fulfill my purpose.
Yeah.
And the thing that I'm learning is how to find the and that's what I'm trying to do with this as well. For me, like part of the spiritual quest is to find a sense of quiet, to find a sense of stillness, to be able to really connect deeply with myself or the person who's in front of me. And then the and for me now is how do I keep bringing that into my work? Like, how do I, continue to, like, in my work find stillness, in my work find that deep sense of connection with self or other. And so that's the quest that I'm on right now, like to be able to not feel pulled in two directions, but see if I can bring those threads together.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the same thing sort of happened with me, because when I started Witty, I was coming from a proper corporate workplace, which, as I was talking to Shruti as well, are often designed keeping the ideal male, person in mind, and the way they would enjoy working. Sort of, it is assumed that a lot of women might also enjoy working the same way, which could be true, not just for, which could be not true, not only for women but also for men. However, I realized that we could create a workplace where people weren't bound to work for 8 hours a day, where they could maybe spend 4 hours of their time working constructively, and maybe use the rest of the time to do whatever they want to do. But if everyone in the organization is giving that 4 hours, and if they are doing it with sincerity, I feel a lot of progress can be made each day. And with that, you don't just you're not just working towards one thing. You get the time to explore other sides of your personality as well. And then I realized that I am not the only one thinking like this, because gig economy is booming, and a lot of people now would like to be gig workers. And maybe it is not just the monetary part of it, but the fact that a lot of people are realizing that there is more to what we could, like, how we can spend our 24 hours than to just have that 9 to 5 job, which pulls in all your, and plus the commute and everything that sort of pulls all of your energy towards just one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I'm so encouraged by sort of hearing that, and also the fact that I think the new generation is pulling us in a direction where, we really need to rethink how we think about our workplaces. And I think so far we've always kind of optimized along a very unidimensional thing of, okay, what's the revenue, what's the profit. And of course, that continues to be important. I mean, finally, economically, things have to make sense. But I think organizations are waking up to the fact that there is so much more, right? This whole thing about stakeholder capitalism, the whole thing about the movement around sustainability. I think people are waking up to the fact that, they're responsible to the planet, to their employees, to a lot more than just their shareholders, and that workplaces can actually play a role. Like, I was telling you at the beginning that I dream of a different kind of workplace. Like, I really think that workplaces should be places where we come alive, like, where we come and we sort of are fired by something that we can create together, where we are connected by love to each other and to what we are trying to create. And they don't have to be sort of these toxic places where we're kind of coming away with hurt and feeling less than who we are. So yeah, I mean, I hope that like from what you're saying, and I think from what I'm seeing of how the world is moving, I really hope that we can pull our workplaces in that direction. And they can be more whole.
So you did your MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, which is considered as one of the most prestigious institutions in India. And then you went on to do your master's in education from Harvard University, which is again one of the most prestigious institutions in the USA and considered to be an Ivy League institution. What differences did you see in the education system and the teaching style between what was being taught here and what you learned there? Of course, the course was very different, but was there a specific difference that you could spot in the teaching styles or the education methodology?
The thing I noticed most actually was not about the teaching style, but about just the cultural ethos of the institute. And I'll tell you, like, the biggest difference that struck me was that over there you were not competing against each other. You were just competing against yourself to get better. And like in IIM Ahmedabad, people have this Excel sheet which they maintain where they keep a track of who are the front runners, what are they doing in each. I mean, it's crazy. Like, people would know that, in the next quiz I should beat this person by this much so that I'll get ahead in the grades.
Oh my God.
And at Harvard, nobody knew each other's grades. They were completely confidential. I had no clue what anybody else was getting. And the thing that really struck me was so many of the professors gave you a chance that if you were not satisfied with your grade on an assignment, you could redo it. And then it made so much sense to me that, I mean, finally, what's the point of doing an assignment, right? It's to learn.
Yeah.
And I mean, a chance to redo is just a chance to learn it better.
Yeah.
And so that was the thing that really struck me, that, just the whole attitude that it's about you learning something and getting better each day than what you were yesterday, was remarkably different.
Amazing. Wow. I mean, there have been so many instances where you submit an assignment or give an exam and go back and think, oh, I wish I just get a chance to do it again. This time I won't make the mistake that I made. And if given that chance, it affects your confidence in a certain way, because finally you get that validation that I was able to do it. Otherwise, you go back with the thought that, oh, I didn't do it.
And also, like, when you get that chance to do it again, you also get a chance to work on the feedback, right? So, like, one of the assignments, I remember the professor said, okay, this is what is missing. And then I really worked on that feedback. And then that's finally what work is about, finally, when you're in the workplace. It's not about that you'll get things perfect the first time or you will get a whatever 99 on 100. It's about creating a product which you keep improving, refining, making better, basis feedback, basis what you learn yourself or from each other. And so I thought that was just brilliant. I mean, it really struck me coming from IMA and the competitive sort of like where everything was about competing with the other person.
Lovely. I wish if somebody from the academic fraternity is listening, they sort of see how in their respective institutions at least implement this small change, just a small simple change, and could help so many people. Do you think there are certain leadership practices or mindsets that are becoming obsolete now, no more needed? So, what would those be?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And I think I see these practices very alive, but I really do think that it's time to kind of sunset them. One is just like, a command control approach where you feel like, okay, as a leader, I know the best answer and I expect everybody to kind of follow that. Because I think today's world is so complex and so unpredictable, and there is so much data and information coming from every side, and like any problem that you're looking at has so many different dimensions to it that I think organizations to be successful really need to tap like their collective wisdom. Instead of thinking that one person at the top or a few people at the top know the right answers and then everybody else just has to follow that. I think that mindset is quite obsolete now. And so everything that goes with that, I mean, I think we need a lot more collaboration. I think we talk about diversity, but a lot of times we're just paying lip service. We're talking about numbers and things like that. But finally, are you really hearing those diverse voices? Are you really taking into account those diverse perspectives when you're, making a decision? I think that's what we really need. Like, being able to, the person who's, say, right now seen as the most junior person, maybe the person who's on the field, they are the ones who are interacting with the customer, right? Sometimes they will have the best understanding of what the issues are, rather than somebody sitting in their cabin in the corner office. In fact, one of my clients told me this story of how there was a manufacturing firm, and they were having this problem where so they were making soap, and what was happening was many of the packets were going without soap. And so they brought in these consultants, and they did invested a lot of money trying to solve this problem, and did something, whatever, 0.1 0.2% difference got made, but nothing significant. And then they said, okay, let's go and ask the person who's running the line. And they asked him, and he said, oh, it's very easy. We'll just put a fan, and the empty packets will fly away, and the others will stay.
Wow.
So,
And they never consulted him in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's, wisdom can come from anywhere, and we have to really be open to that. I think we have, especially in India, we have this hierarchical sort of mindset.
Yeah.
We've always grown up being taught that listen to your elders, and we have this lot of respect for our seniors, which is good. Okay, it's fine to a certain extent, but I think it's time to democratize things and shake things up a little bit. And I think that's the job of leaders.
Perfect. And any leadership skill that you feel is very important, like apart from like, even if the leader does not have any other skill, at least this is the skill that they need to have if they have to remain relevant.
I think listening. I think it's the most underrated skill. And we always imagine that leaders have to be like charismatic and inspirational, and they have to be like the person at the pulpit who's sort of giving the gyan. And of course, there's a place for everything, but I think that leaders have to really be able to listen, and listen in a way that they're actually open to hearing what the other person is saying. Like a lot of times we listen and we're kind of just thinking about, okay, how my argument is right and yours isn't. But actually listening with an open mind, I think is, it's a superpower.
Yeah, lovely. So in your coaching practice, have you seen women leaders facing challenges that are very different from men leaders, or is it just like a myth or an assumption?
So I have seen, differences. But I would say, and some are inherent perhaps, like mommy guilt. Like I've never heard of daddy guilt. I've not even heard the phrase. And of course, fathers, like in my practice, also care about spending time with their children, but they don't carry as much guilt as mothers do. Um, but I think the bigger differences I have seen are in the system that, you know, that in some sense women almost have to fight so much harder for everything that comes to them. And 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 there's a lot of research, there's a lot of writing about this, but it's almost like, you know, every step you have to be so careful. Like you have to be walking this tightrope where if you're too nice, then you're not enough of a leader. But if you're too assertive, then, oh, you know, you're not behaving like a woman is expected to. So there is always this, and I mean, just so many unconscious and people who are very well meaning, but, you know, will somebody comes back after maternity break and people will just take away parts of her portfolio without asking her. They will just assume that, oh, she will want a lighter workload because she's come back from maternity. So I think the system creates challenges for women which sometimes we are blind to. Like I said, you may be doing it in good faith, you may be doing it with the best interest, but there are so many, you know, hidden assumptions, so many hidden stereotypes that are not on the surface, and that just create like a harder environment. It's quite heartbreaking actually sometimes when I work with women, and, you know, they kind of like this lone warrior fighting the system, especially as they grow more and more senior. It's challenging. So that's the biggest difference I see. That,
And
you
don't
know,
you think the way success is measured right now, it's measured in turnover figures, whether a company has become a unicorn or not, how much is the, you know, revenue, how much are the profits. That is how success is measured for any business, and that is how, you know, it has been for ages. Um, but till the time we keep chasing numbers and have that as the sole parameter of measuring success for a firm, um do I mean, how do you then sort of marry purpose with, you know, if somebody is chasing their purpose and that purpose may not be related to, uh, you know, these huge turnover figures, but they will still be seen through a lens, through the same lens in the society. So then what is the advice you would give to someone who's sort of questioning whether they should chase their purpose, whether they should chase numbers? Then how do they take it slow?
yeah. So are you talking as an individual? Like, how do you then choose where to go? Or are you
Yeah, I
talking
mean,
as
if
an
somebody say
organizational
has
leader?
knows that going slow is the way, it would be better. I would be more calmer. Somebody would be more, you know, more rooted. They could be a better leader if they are more rooted, more stable, calmer. But when they would be doing that, there would be so many other players in the market who would be much more aggressive. The work culture may be much more toxic. The work culture may require everyone to keep grilling, keep going faster, which is, I mean, how they might also achieve a lot of numbers and figures. And, you know, the second person who might be building a much more equitable, much more happier workplace may perhaps, you know, even perish just because they have been just trying to be calm and rooted and slow.
Yeah. So, you know, I think, well, one, I think society has to evolve. Like, you know, it's a almost like collective evolution that is slowly happening and needs to happen. But also, I think I would, you know, I would look at the assumption that if we are calm and whatever, we can't deliver. So, you know, I've actually come across these mind-blowing stories. There's this beautiful book called Reinventing Organizations, where the author Frederick Laloux has actually studied organizations that are structured in, like, that are driven by like, just as I talked about the stages of power for individuals, he's actually talked about how organizations evolve across the spectrum. and and he's shared case studies of organizations. So there's one that I was always so blown away by, which is, you know, this nursing organization. It's called Butzorg, and forgetting which country, I think one of the Scandinavian countries, if I'm not mistaken. It has some 60-70% market share. but the way it's run, there's a lot of like self-organizing teams. There's a lot of collective purpose. The way that it's led is completely different. Like it overturns everything we believe today about how management should be run and all of that. So teams of nurses actually, like say a team of 20 is looking after a particular geography, and they take all the decisions. They work with the customers, they figure out when they need to hire, and they don't have a boss. They have a coach. So if they are not able to figure out something amongst themselves, if they run into a problem, then that coach comes in to help them figure out the next step. And Frederick Laloux tells this story of how when he went to interview the CEO of this company, he sat with him for many hours, and the CEO was not disturbed. He didn't get emails, phones,
Wow.
whatever. And he asked him that, how come you're so free? And he said, because my company is working like it should be. Like, it's not my job to be fighting all the fires and all of that. So, maybe it is possible to build organizations that optimize on multiple dimensions and not just one. And
Correct.
I loved reading this book because it gave me hope that it is possible, that you don't
Lovely.
have to, like, if you're chasing purpose, that does not mean that you're letting go of everything else. And it's possible to build a business that is, that makes good business sense, but also is human and yeah, deeply meaningful.
Wow. Lovely. Thank you so much, Shweta, for this lovely conversation. It was so good. It was deep and profound also at some levels. So happy to have met you and hosted you at the Untitled show. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bhavna. I really enjoyed our conversation as well.